Hello, everyone. This is Jeffrey Kerr. I'm here today with an actor, concert soloist, and voiceover artist. He has worked in television, film, and the theater with countless credits to his name. He is also a member of SAG AFTRA. Please welcome Ray Buffer.
Hi there, Jeffrey. How are you?
I'm good. And how's your day?
Going well. A little cloudy out here in Burbank. I just left an audition, so you got me parked in a car, but I'm happy to talk to you today. Thank you for having me.
To start things off, how did you first get started in the industry?
Well, I grew up in South Florida, which is where I'm originally from. I first started in music. I began playing violin in fifth grade, and that evolved into choral work when I got into middle school. And then I discovered that music and theater could be combined. I discovered musical theater, and that became my love through high school and college and led me into doing that professionally right out of university because there was a dinner theater in Boca Raton, Florida called Jan McCart's Royal Palm Dinner Theater. And that's where I earned my points to become a member of Actors Equity. And I worked in musical theater and in regular legit theater. I also worked as a stage manager under the Equity Union throughout Florida for a number of years. And then in 1999, I moved out here to California and began seriously looking into my TV and film career, making that conversion from live theater to the small screen. It was an interesting road. It was a road of ups and downs. Now I'm at a point after the pandemic where I'm building my credits again, focusing on my own performance career. In years prior, I also directed and produced and ran a theater company, but I kind of grew tired of that and wanted to focus on me being the performer and someone else worrying about turning the lights on.
Yeah, and you've done quite a bit of work on both the stage and screen. What have you enjoyed most about going back and forth between mediums?
Yeah, I like the variety. I mean, I guess I'm the type of guy that maybe could burn out of something after doing the same thing for a couple of years. The ability to vary it, like right now, I'm still pursuing and working in TV and film, but I'm also in rehearsal for an intimate original musical. So it's giving me an outlet to perform live, which I haven't really done for about 5 years in terms of actual theater performance. I do sing quite frequently at churches and do solo work and performance work with small groups, but being in a show, doing the same show night after night for a month for a live audience, that's something that I haven't done in a while that I'm looking forward to doing. So, yeah, I like the variety to answer your question.
Throughout all your years as an actor, what would you say are among your favorite experiences of working in the theater?
Well, I mean, theater is spontaneous. I mean, yes, there's a script, but you have to take the circumstances that you're in and deal with them. You have to accept them and reflect them, and acting is reacting, right? That's one of the old adages. And sometimes you have different things that you have to react to. Sometimes something will happen in the theater that's unexpected, or the audience will laugh at something that they've never laughed at before. You have to be actively listening when you're in the theater, and you have to shape your performance based on the stimulus around you. That is the aspect of theater that I really enjoy. I enjoy the repetitiveness of it because then you can always sharpen it. You can always say, well, gee, last night I really didn't hit the inflection on that word the way I wanted to. Or, they didn't laugh at that last night. Maybe if I tweak it, if I do it this way, you kind of use the audience as your experiment. You can kind of like try something slightly different from night to night to tweak it and figure out what works best. So that's the cool thing about theater. Film, TV, you can't do that. It's like you got one take, you got to go in there, you got to get it done. And sometimes you're shooting things completely out of context from one scene to the other. You might shoot it backwards, shoot the last scene first and the first scene last. And you, as the actor, you just have to process that and not think in terms of linear theater acting.
Yeah, and you also have a ton of TV credits on your resume. Are there any in particular that happen to be among your favorite experiences on the small screen?
Well, yeah. I mean, I thought things were really going to take off for me back in 2004. I had been in California about 5 years, doing a lot of background work, a lot of, featured extra kind of things, doing some stand in work, some behind the scenes work. I even produced a documentary film a year prior to that. But in 2004, I got booked as a featured background on Curb Your Your Enthusiasm. And I showed up there, and after sitting and holding for about half an hour, an AD came up to me and said, "Oh, I got someone that wants to talk to you. Would you follow me?" I'm like, "Okay, sure." So I follow him through the trailers and things, and he knocks on the door, and the door opens, and it's Larry David, the producer and star of Curb Your Enthusiasm and writer. And so he says, "Hey, are you Ray?" I'm like, "Yeah, I'm Ray." He says, "Oh, well, I heard you used to be an actual stage manager in Florida." And I'm like, "Yeah, I did stage manage a bunch of shows there." He's like, "Well, we're doing the storyline this year where I'm in the producers and we're rehearsing it, and it's like a season long thing. And we need someone to play the stage manager. And, you might have some lines. Are you up for that?" I'm like, "Absolutely, sign me up." And we talked a little bit more, like 15, 20 seconds. And then he's like, "All right, take Ray over to the contract and let's get him signed up." And so I had a few episodes under my belt, and I thought, wow, maybe this is the beginning of my big break. And it seems like sometimes when you think that, that's when it's not. It's like hubris. You think things are going to take off, and then all of a sudden it's crickets. It's a nosedive. So I did that season. I had a nice little piece of tape, a nice scene to show for it. But then I just had to get back into a regular kind of job to pay the bills. I did that for a year or so, and then started to work behind the scenes in musical theater and kind of delve my way into deciding to open my own business, and did that for a few years before, like I said earlier, coming back and doing personal performance. So Curb Your Enthusiasm was a favorite moment. I've got some other moments coming up. Actually, tomorrow is the season premiere of Into the Wild Frontier on INSP TV. They're exclusively like a Western TV station. And I think it's available on like Pluto and some of these other streaming conduits. But it's a docu-series about the Old West. This episode specifically about Kit Carson. It's not just reenactments without dialogue. It's live action Western scenes combined with talking head historians who are like talking about what happened back then and giving you a little glimpse of the story behind the live action. And I play a villain, the big bully of the North, a Canadian trapper in the early 1800s who flirts with a squaw that Kit Carson wants to marry. And so that triangle conflict creates this dual situation. It's on tomorrow. I'm not sure the actual time, but again, February 15 on INSP TV, Into the Wild Frontier.
As I was looking you up on IMDb, I saw that you got to be an extra in some movies from different Oscar-winning directors. What I'm about to do is go over them. When I do so, would you mind talking about the scenes you were in as well as your experiences making them?
Sure, as best as I can recall.
In 1994's True Lies from James Cameron, you played a police captain. That movie starred Arnold Schwarzenegger and Jamie Lee Curtis, and that was pretty much Cameron's last film before he went on to become a multi-billionaire off of Titanic and Avatar.
Yeah, if you remember, I don't know if you were looking at the news back then of what James Cameron was working on, but he was supposed to direct the first Spider-Man movie back in
Yeah.
that decade. And he and I talked about that actually. Yes, I was only an extra, but I was actually impressed with how open he was to just having a discussion with me about, his plans. Like, "Oh, I can't wait. This is like my favorite character. Can't wait to direct this." He was very passionate about it back then. And I got to work with Tom Arnold, and I met Arnold. I was primarily, to answer your question, I was in the scenes in Miami where they filmed, where I was at on location. They filmed a sequence in downtown Miami where I think it was Elisha Jishu played the daughter, and she was on the nose of the Harrier jet. The Harrier jet had landed in the middle of downtown Miami, and Arnold was in the cockpit. So those were the scenes we were shooting, and I was the police captain, like at the car, just right next to the Harrier jet. So you kind of see me blurred for a couple of frames. But the takeaways from that was I remember Arnold Schwarzenegger had a stogie, had a cigar that he would hide. He would like smoke it in between takes, and he'd hide it down in the cockpit and then do his take. And then as soon as they said cut, it was back to the cigar. That was fun to see, that behind the scene glimpse of his behavior. Again, like I say, when we were doing the office scenes, it was so cool just to talk to James Cameron about Spider-Man. And then I was so sad when it didn't come to pass. But he was a really cool director. And when I did take a selfie with him, and I remember thinking, this is the first time I've met a director who's taller than me, because he was about 3 or 4 inches taller.
Well, yeah, and hey, Cameron has at least gone to doing bigger and better things.
Oh, of course, yeah. And I think if I read my sources right, I think Canon Films had kind of pulled the rights, and there was some weird reason why he wasn't able to do Spider-Man. But yeah, of course, he did Avatar and all these other wonderful things.
And in 1997's Contact from Robert Zemeckis, you played a press reporter, and this was like his big follow up to his blockbuster success with Forrest Gump 3 years before.
You know, to be honest with you, I had more interaction with the first AD on that shoot because the scene I was in was shot primarily at Cape Canaveral. And I was in like the tower of Cape Canaveral, just playing one of the press agents, just smoking a cigarette, looking like I belong in the 1960s. But yeah, that was an excellent film. I did briefly meet Jodie Foster, and she was very nice. And those were early days. I mean, that was what, 30 years ago, right? So that was when I was still living in Florida, and so was True Lies, in fact. So, going to Miami and working on True Lies, and then going to Orlando, Cape Canaveral area, and working on Contact. Those were just things that were proximate to where I was living. When I did True Lies, I was living in West Palm, so Miami was about an hour and a half away. When I did Contact, I was living in Orlando, Central Florida. Cape Canaveral was about 45 minutes away. So at that time in the 90s, Florida was a very active film environment. Now I understand it's kind of died down, and most of that has gone to Georgia.
Well, yeah, I even remember hearing how, when Universal Studios Florida opened, it was now a theme park by movie studio as well as, productions were taking place there back in the 90s.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's cool because I was there at the right time. I mean, when I was at Universal, Superboy was filming there, and Swamp Thing, and Casper the Movie, SeaQuest DSV, all these kind of cool shows. Some of them started in California and then moved to Florida because they became cheaper and they got breaks producing them in Florida. So it was a cool time to be in Florida.
Then in 2002's Catch Me If You Can from Steven Spielberg, you played a passenger.
Yeah, just a passenger. Sometimes when you work as a background person, it's a small, intimate call, and sometimes it's a big cattle call, like 200 people. And I think this, if my recollection is correct, this was a large call, even though I was a passenger in the fuselage of a plane. So I was part of a smaller subset of background. There was a lot of people there that day. The thing I took away from that experience was it was the only movie set I've been on where they served lobster at dinner. Crew, extras, leads, they all got lobster if they wanted it. Traditionally, the food, the craft service, the catering is very good on film sets, but you very rarely have like lobsters. I thought that was very interesting. I'm not sure if that's a Steven Spielberg thing or what, because I think that's the only Spielberg film that I've worked on. I had no interaction with Spielberg on that film. So to answer your question, it was a fun experience. It was a lot of people there, and I ate well.
I remember seeing that he does at least a toast on the beginning and end of shooting of every single movie he's done.
Oh, okay.
And in 2003's Hulk from Ang Lee, you played an Atheon captain, and this was in the early days of comic book superhero movies, with both the original X-Men and the aforementioned Spider-Man proving to be very successful.
Yeah, he got a lot of criticism for, his rendition of the Hulk, but he was the first one to bring it to film. And, it was very CGI heavy, and it was the early days of CGI too. I liked his concepts of the comic book. He did a lot of transitions that were like comic books, turning a page, or, a frame up here of live action and a frame down here of live action. I think he really respected the format of a comic book and try to create that. But he got criticized pretty heavily for that movie. I had fun on it. My takeaways were that he rarely spoke English. I think he had like a first AD or someone who basically gave most of the direction after he would tell the first AD what he wanted. The scene I was in, again, I was just featured background, but it was memorable in that I got a number of friends from all over the world that called me and said, "Oh, I just saw you in the Hulk." I'm like, "Oh, okay, cool. I can't wait to see it myself." And I was in a scene where Josh Lucas, he was tranquilizing the Hulk in a scene, and the tranquilizer he uses turns into some kind of gooey glue stuff. So he shoots the Hulk, and I guess it bounces off the Hulk and then comes back and hits him. But I'm in that scene where they're approaching the Hulk, and even though I didn't have scripted dialogue, I said, "Oh shit." I did it in an over exaggerated way, like, "Oh shit," and then turned and ran. And so you can read my lips and you can clearly see that's what I'm saying, even though you don't hear me. But that was a cool moment. And it was cool to be part of that Marvel universe early on.
Yeah, about 5 years before the MCU came along.
Yeah.
In fact, I remember while Ang Lee was promoting Life of Pi, he said, well, there are two takeaways from his experience on the Hulk movie. One is that while working with big VFX really prepared him to make Life of Pi. And the other being is that looking back, he thought he should have had more fun with the Hulk as opposed to doing a full-on psychodrama.
Mm. Yeah, I could see that. But when you're telling a character's origin story, I think you have to kind of focus on the psychology a little bit, to really get the audience to understand the character. So, he was maybe in a catch 22, he had a story he had to tell, but then, he also had to make it entertaining. And I enjoyed watching it. So it was cool to be part of it.
Well, yeah, there are people out there who do find that movie to be a misunderstood masterpiece.
Yeah.
We haven't touched as much on your career as a concert soloist and voiceover artist. What have you been enjoying most about doing those jobs?
Well, again, I think the variety. I think just the pleasure I get from knowing, okay, well, one day I'm going to go to a film set and I've got a few lines I need to learn for that. And then the next day in my calendar, I'm singing a solo at a church or doing a concert or doing a quartet of like jazz hits for, a live performance or going to a sound studio and recording some audio for a commercial. Every day can be something different. When I was a little kid, I kind of wanted to be a cowboy. I kind of wanted to be an astronaut when I grew up. I kind of wanted to be a superhero or kind of wanted to be a bad guy. And now as an actor, I can do all those things. I didn't have to pick just one. I can be all of them. And so that's the cool thing about doing voiceover or singing or acting. It's just that you have such a plethora of options. The cool thing about voiceover is you can wear a hat and show up in a hoodie and do the job, right? You don't have to put a costume on. Voiceover actors, I don't think a lot of people realize they work very physically in the booth. Like if you ever see behind the scenes video of a voice actor actually performing and recording in a booth, it's not always an attractive thing because in order to make up for what you're not seeing, they have to kind of overact in the sound booth. So the mouth is like contorted and you're getting the enunciation and the action. And, all of this stuff is going on in the sound booth because they know they're not going to be seen. It helps make the sound seem authentic. There's an art form to it. And it's cool to work with other people doing it and see how they approach the work. But I enjoy doing it. Again, it's just another iron in the fire.
And as a member of SAG-AFTRA, you get to vote for the Screen Actors Guild Awards. What usually goes through your mind when you vote on nominations as well as the winners?
Well, to be honest, I rejoined SAG about 2 years ago, and I decided shortly after rejoining to activate my FICOR status. So in SAG, it's a union, right? And so one of the rules of working in a union is that you can only do union work. But in California, like other states, it's a right to work state. So if someone offers you work, but it's not union work, you should have the right to accept that work. And the way you do that legally with SAG's permission, quote unquote, is to activate your FICOR status, which means I'm allowing myself to take advantage of the state's laws. And so what that does in terms of your membership with SAG is they say you're no longer a member, but I still have a SAG number. I still sign in and see my profile in SAG. I still get money put towards pension. I just can't vote, which is the reason I'm bringing this up. And my dues are 10% less. And if I want, let's say down the road, I get a season regular job on a show paying a couple $100,000 a year. Well, at that time, I'll repay my initiation fee of like $4,000 or $5,000, whatever it might be in the future, and then become a full status SAG member where I can vote again. But really, the only thing that I sacrifice by being FICOR is my ability to vote. I'm paying less in dues, and I'm also getting the best of both worlds because if a non-union contract comes along for $10,000, I can accept that job. Whereas if I was just a SAG member, I could only accept SAG work and I'd have to say no to that $10,000 contract. So I am where I need to be right now. If my career takes off to, like I say, where I get like an offer to be a season regular on an episodic show for 13 episodes, well then yeah, here's $5,000 SAG. I'll say no to all the non-union work because I know I'm working regularly as a SAG actor and I don't need to take even a $10,000 non-union job at that point. I don't vote on the SAG movies.
For those who'd like to pursue a career in the industry, where do you think would be a good place to start?
I would say Google the closest improvisation troupe near you, because I think improvisation is 24-hour fitness for the actor. That's your gym. That's where you need to go to meet people, to have fun, to enjoy acting, to be creative, to activate your inner writer and also your performer, to get out any kind of inhibitions or anxieties you have, and to just train you to be quick and alert and funny. And those are the elements that actually book work, because you can get a script and you can go into an audition and you can say the lines, but the casting director and the producer, they're looking for that little something more. And that little something more comes out of the nuances that you put into a script, and the quirks and the facial expressions and the way you hold yourself, your body language. And all of that is sharpened by improvisation training. So I would say whether you're a beginner or an expert, you need to be actively involved in improvisation somewhere.
And before we go, do you have any other upcoming projects that you'd like to share with us?
Well, I mentioned earlier the musical theater in Studio City, a little theater called Two Roads Theater. In late March, we'll open Heavenly Country, which is a jukebox musical that has country songs in it that have been licensed for the show. I get to perform some of the funnier songs in the show. I guess I'm the comic relief in a way. So I get to do a great song by Ray Stevens called Mississippi Squirrel Revival. I also get to sing a song by Jerry Reed called She Got the Gold Mine, I Got the Shaft. And I also get to sing George Strait's song, All My Exes Live in Texas. I play Boss Ross, who is the owner of a moving company. And the actual main story of the musical involves my employee named Nemo, who falls in love with a client, someone whose stuff we're moving. He also battles alcohol addiction in the course of the show. And so the question is, will he, won't he beat his demons? Will he, won't he get with the girl at the end of the story? I'm one of the supporting characters. But like I said, I get to do those 3 great songs. It's been fun so far in rehearsal. So definitely check out, if you're in California, Southern California, Heavenly Country at the Two Roads Theater beginning in late March.
Ray, I thank you very much for devoting your time to this interview. It was great getting to talk to you.
Nice talking to you as well.
For those who'd like to keep up with your career, where can people find you on the internet?
My website is raybuffer.com. I'm also on Instagram at The Real Ray Buffer. Feel free to follow me and I'll follow you back. And you can also check out my IMDb. Just type Ray Buffer into the search field of IMDb and you will find me.
Thanks again for joining me today, Ray. This was great.
Thank you. Have a great one.